Hey, General Hospital fans, welcome back because oh my gosh, do we have a rumor roundup for you today. We are talking multiple storyline pivots, a couple of shocking exits that our sources are buzzing about, and I know you've been waiting, some actual tea on what is happening with Carly Corinthos and whether or not that woman is finally going to face some real consequences for once in her Port Charles life. We've also got some chatter about a brand new character coming in who could completely shake up the Quartermain dynamic, and trust me, that family does not need any more shaking. I'm your host here at Soap Dirt, and we're getting into all of it right now. But before we dive in, and I say this every time because it really does matter, these are rumors. These are leaks. These are not official ABC spoilers. We have sources, we have leakers, and like always, I want to be transparent about the credibility level of each one, so you can decide how much stock you want to put in any of this. One of our sources has been incredibly on the money lately. Genuinely impressive track record. Things they've told us have played out almost exactly as described. The other source? I love them, I really do, but I'd say we're sitting at maybe 65 to 70% accuracy on a good day, so I always flag when the intel is coming from that direction. And then separately, we also got a little bit of loose lips gold from a fan event that happened recently, so we'll start there because that stuff is always fun. Alright, so let's talk about what came out of this fan event. Now, a couple of cast members did a meet and greet recently, and you know how it goes. Actors get comfortable, fans ask great questions, and sometimes more comes out than the network PR team probably intended. So here's what filtered back to us from people who were there. First, there was some really interesting stuff said about Drew Quartermain's trajectory heading into the back half of the year. Apparently, the actor was asked point-blank about whether Drew is going to stay tied to Yelku, or whether we'd see him branch out, and he kind of laughed it off, but then said something along the lines of Drew needing to figure out who he is outside of a boardroom. Which, okay, read into that what you will, but to me that sounds like the writers are finally going to put Drew in some kind of situation that pulls him away from the corporate storyline, which frankly has been dragging. Nobody is tuning in for stock options and hostile takeovers. No offense to the writers. We want adventure. We want stakes. We want Drew Quartermain doing something that actually makes our hearts pound. The second thing that came out of the fan event was about Carly. Now, a cast member, and I'm going to be deliberately vague here to protect the source, made a comment that suggested Carly is going to have one of those reckoning moments. The phrase used was something like, Carly is going to have to look in the mirror this fall. And in soap terms, that usually means one of two things. Either someone she loves is going to hold her accountable in a way she cannot dodge, or she's going to do something so spectacularly wrong that even she can't spin it. Given everything going on with her right now, I'd say both options are very much on the table. And then third, there was some chatter about a character return that got people at the event buzzing. A familiar face from the past is supposedly being considered to come back into the canvas, and they're being described as someone who has ties to both the Spencer family and to Sonny. Now, that could narrow it down to a handful of people, and we've heard one name in particular floated around backstage that I'll get to in a little bit when we talk about the leaker info. Okay, so now let's get into the real behind-the-scenes stuff, starting with our more reliable source, because I know that's what you're really here for. So, the biggest piece of news coming out of our top source right now is about Sonny Corinthos. And specifically, about the fact that Sonny's grip on Port Charles may be loosening in a pretty significant way. We've been hearing for a while now that the show has wanted to evolve the mob storyline, or in some cases, move away from it, and part of that reportedly involves Sonny being put in a position where his power base is genuinely threatened. Not in the way it's been threatened 100 times before, where he comes out on top by the end of sweeps. I mean actually structurally threatened. The chatter is that a new faction is moving in, and this isn't just a rival mob family. The intel suggests it's something more institutional, more organized, and tied directly to what's been happening on the WSB front. And that brings me to something really exciting, which is a potential crossover of the mob world and the spy world in a way that General Hospital honestly hasn't done in years. Because our source says the plan is to use the chaos caused by everything that's been happening at the WSB, the power vacuum, the cleanup operation, as a kind of magnet that pulls characters from different corners of Port Charles into the same orbit. So you'd have WSB people and mob people and civilians all bumping up against each other, which creates conflict, which creates drama, which is exactly what this show needs. And speaking of WSB, let's talk about Anna Devane, because our source has some things to say about what's next for her. So Anna has been going through it. That's an understatement. But the word we're hearing is that her road back is going to be a lot more complicated than just getting her job back and resuming operations. There's apparently a storyline in the works that calls back to Anna's past in a way that the current headwriting team feels has never fully been explored, and our source described it as, and I'm paraphrasing here, Anna being forced to confront something she buried a long time ago that is now very much alive and relevant. I don't want to speculate too much on what that could mean specifically, but if you know Anna's history, there are several threads that could be pulled. And for those of you who are longtime General Hospital watchers, that should be very exciting. Now, let's talk about something our source flagged that's a bit more on the casting side of things, because there is reportedly a new character coming in who is going to be positioned as a significant love interest story going into the fall. The character, as described to us, is a woman late 30s, early 40s, who has a history in medicine or law. And she comes to Port Charles with her own agenda that isn't immediately clear to the other characters. Our source says she's being written as sophisticated and a little morally gray, which is always a good sign, honestly. The name attached to the character in what we've heard backstage is not a name I recognize from the canvas, so it sounds like a brand new creation rather than a legacy character recast. We've heard she may cross paths with both the Quartermain world and the hospital world, which gives the writers a lot of flexibility in how they position her. Additionally, there's been some whisper about what's going to happen with the Scorpio family going forward, specifically about Maxie. Now, Maxie has been in a really interesting space story-wise because she's been tethered pretty closely to Deception and to the Sasha situation and to her complicated feelings about Spinelli. And our source is telling us that there's a plan to shake Maxie out of that orbit and put her in a storyline that feels a little more urgent, a little more personal stakes. The word used was legacy, as in, Maxie's storyline is going to tie into her own legacy and her family's legacy in Port Charles. Given that her mother is Felicia Scorpio, and that the Scorpio name carries so much weight in terms of the show's history with the WSB and international intrigue, I think there's something really compelling they could do there if they follow through. Alright, now let's talk about the exit situation, because this one has been percolating for a while. Our source has confirmed that at least one legacy character is being written out in the next 2 to 3 months. We don't have a definitive name, and I want to be careful here not to just speculate wildly, but our source did say the exit is not a recast situation, meaning the character themselves is leaving, not just the actor. That tends to point toward either a death or a departure story rather than a simple swap. And the way our source described it, the exit is connected to the larger storyline shift the show is making, so it's not arbitrary. It's meant to be a narrative catalyst, something that changes the landscape for multiple characters, not just a story that closes one door and moves on. There's also been chatter about a specific pairing that has been popular with fans that may be heading toward heartbreak territory. I'll just say that a couple we've all been rooting for seems to be heading for a complication that isn't external this time. No villains, no conspiracies, no one trying to tear them apart from the outside. It's an internal fracture, which is honestly scarier for the long-term health of a relationship on a soap because it's harder to fix. Our source said something along the lines of they love each other but they want different things, which, as a soap fan, you know is both the most heartbreaking and the most believable reason for two people to fall apart. Okay, now let's get into our secondary source stuff. And as always, I want to flag that this is the 65 to 70% accuracy situation. So hold this information loosely, okay? Don't come back at me if none of this happens because I am literally telling you up front to keep your expectations calibrated. So this source is saying that there is a possible return, not confirmed, not even close to confirmed, of a character from the mid-2000s era who many fans have been wanting back for years. The description given was a character who left Port Charles under complicated circumstances and who has never had a proper resolution to their storyline. Again, I'm being vague on purpose because I genuinely don't have enough to point to one specific person, and I'd rather be honest about that than throw out a name and have everyone spiral. But our less reliable source seemed excited about this one, for whatever that's worth. The same source also said something interesting about the teen scene, which, full disclosure, General Hospital has struggled with historically. The chatter is that there's a conscious effort being made to actually invest in the younger characters and give them storylines with real stakes rather than just background presence. Whether that means what we've seen play out on screen recently, or whether it means something bigger coming down the pipeline, we're not sure. But even the idea of the show taking its younger cast seriously is something fans have been asking for, so even if this is only partially true, that's encouraging. One more thing from our secondary source, and I'm genuinely not sure what to make of this one. There's a rumor, and I really want to emphasize rumor, that a character who has been presumed dead for a significant period of time may not be as dead as everyone in Port Charles thinks. Now, I know, this is General Hospital. Nobody stays dead. This is a show where people survive boats exploding and cliffs and being shot multiple times and being injected with mystery serums. So on one level, yes, obviously, resurrections are part of the DNA of this show. But the way this source described it, it's not just a throwaway return. It's described as a story that would be built up over time with deliberate seeding before the reveal. That suggests it's been in the planning stages for a while if it's true, which makes it slightly more credible. But again, 65% accuracy source. We watch and wait. And before I wrap up, one little piece of casting gossip that came to us from a completely separate channel. Apparently, there have been some informal conversations about bringing in a character with a Caribbean background as part of a longer arc that deals with something happening outside of Port Charles geographically. That's intriguing because the show doesn't often expand beyond its bubble, and when it does, it can be really compelling. Think back to when stories have taken characters to European locations or South American locations, and how much that changed the texture of what we were watching. A storyline that opens up the geography even a little bit could be really refreshing, especially if it ties into the WSB world, which by its nature is international. Alright, that is everything I've got for you in today's Rumor Roundup. As always, some of this will manifest, and some of it will turn out to be backstage noise that went nowhere. That's the nature of leaks and rumors, and I think most of you have been around long enough to know how this works. We share what we hear, we try to be transparent about sourcing, and then we all watch together to see how it shakes out. Thank you so much for being here and for being part of the Soap Dirt community. If you're not subscribed yet, please hit that button wherever you're listening right now because we drop new content regularly and you absolutely do not want to miss the next episode. We are on all the major platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and everywhere else you get your podcasts. We will see you next time, and until then, keep watching and keep talking to us, because we love hearing what you're hearing out there too.